For more, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Dan Perry, International Affairs Analyst and the former Europe and Middle East Editor at the Associated Press, Senior Middle East Correspondent Ariel Osaran, and still with us, our Senior Correspondent Owen Alterman. Gentlemen, thank you all so much. So much to discuss, much to unpack, but we need to start with our exclusive I24 News report. Yulia Pobogalova getting exclusive details. Ariel Osaran, you've got it all. What is the latest? What can you share?
Yeah, amazing information by our senior producer, Yulia Pobogalova, of Kurdish forces in Iraq have launched a ground offensive into Iranian territory, already taking offensive positions in the border town of Marivan. You need the ground forces. You need Iranian fighters armed on the ground to challenge Iran, the IRGC, and the Iranian armed forces. So this ground offensive by Iranian Kurdish fighters, thousands of them crossing the border from Iraq into Iran, has begun, and it is already underway.
This exclusive story gaining so much traction already. The significance, Dan, of a development like this, what it means on the ground, and the likely reaction, of course, across the region.
It's extremely significant. The main question now is this: if the goal is to bring down the regime, and clearly that is a goal, we don't know if they'll stick to that goal, but it's desirable, I think, on the part of most of the protagonists and most of the Arab world as well. How do you do it with only air power? And generally, you'll hear strategists tell you that that is impossible. You need forces on the ground. There are many things that you could do, including to try to compel desertions in the military, the paramilitary, and even the Revolutionary Guard. But one thing would be to bring in Kurdish fighters abutting Iranian Kurdistan, effectively, in the northeast, and basically occupy the energies of the Iranian army so that they will not be so free to massacre protesters elsewhere, not just the army, but also, as I say, the paramilitary and so forth. But also, in projecting such aggression towards Iran and making Iran look again weak, it could embolden protesters. And moreover, if the Iranian Kurds end up being very well armed through the good services of the U.S. by the Iraqi Kurds, they could actually march on Tehran. Unlikely, because it's far away, but that is another possibility. You'd have an armed force on the ground against the regime, not just weighing them down in Kurdistan, but potentially even challenging them. It is dangerous, however, because whenever a despotic government like Iran's is attacked from outside by people who want to help the locally oppressed population, one of the classic things they can do is try to deploy nationalism and say this is an attack on our country and not just this regime. And of course, if this ends up looking like not just an Israeli attack on Iran, but a Kurdish attack on Iran, that potentially can be used by the regime. It may be a lever that you're giving them. So it's a double-edged sword, but what is for sure, it has the potential to be effective because the Kurds historically have been ferocious and effective in carving out autonomy for themselves and imposing their will on larger countries. That is applied in Syria. That is applied for sure in Iraq, where they have a great degree of autonomy. They've been maybe not effective in getting autonomy, but they have really been a bother to the Turks. And it looks like that may happen again in the fourth major country where there are Kurds, Iran.
Oh, and your thoughts on exactly that?
To follow up on some of the points Dan was making, I think it's even more than the regime can deploy nationalism. It is that, but also the fear of a failed state, the fear of a breakup of the country. And you see this over and over again with Iran specialists. One Iran specialist on Twitter said he had never seen more unanimity in the analytical community than how much Iran specialists oppose this idea of arming Kurdish militias and having them come in. And again, the real risk of driving a wedge between two real assets in the fight against the regime, the Kurds on the one hand, and ethnic groups who are well organized, and on the other hand, those incredibly brave protesters in the street inside Iran.
Well, the third large group in Iran, well, of many, are the Azeris.
And that's the point. As we both know, ethnic Persians are a small majority in Iran.
50-some
percent. And if 40 to 50% of the country are ethnic minorities, and of course that's the risk, is that what starts in Kurdistan doesn't end in Kurdistan. It moves on to the Iranian Azerbaijan, to Baluchistan, to other parts of the country, and really unnerves the Iranian middle class and the mainstream that have seen themselves as the backbone of Iran on the day
An
after.
interesting wrinkle here when it comes to the minorities is that the president of Iran, Pezeshkian, is himself Azeri. Weirdly, despite his Armenian-sounding name, he's Azeri. And he reflects something rather interesting, which is that the Azeri minority in Iran, which is very, very large, has historically not been so separatist. And he represents that. The president is an Azeri. But interestingly, he's also different from the radical Muslims surrounding him. When it comes to major officials in the regime, he's a doctor, he's a non-cleric, he lives in a Euclidean universe. He's, I think, seen as someone who, if the regime doesn't fall completely but is reorganized, could end up being a person you can perhaps talk to. And in that regard, he represents non-Persian Iran that might be somehow semi-moderate, or maybe a figure in the transition to dare I say, democratic Iran to something less theocratic.
Now, in a new development, the Arab League is telling Iran to halt attacks on Gulf nations, demanding that Tehran stop the attacks, which it is calling a strategic mistake, saying Iran must come to its senses. Dan Perry, your thoughts, your reaction?
Well, no one trembles before the Arab League.
But how often does the Arab League criticize Iran?
They've criticized Iran, but this is part of the progression that we're seeing here. Iran chose to attack these countries, but it was not a huge surprise. Iran, at the same time, did not really try to cause tremendous damage. It tried to deliver a message, and the message they're trying to get across to the Gulfies is pressure the Americans to stop. What exactly is it Iran wants is not so clear, because Larijani on one hand says there's nothing to talk about, and the foreign minister says we would like renewed talks where maybe, perhaps, they might accept a diktat now that they've been so decapitated. The Arab League, obviously, is going to ask Iran to stop. I'm not sure that this is so wise of the Arab League, because it tells Iran that this is very upsetting to the Arabs, and therefore their strategy is working. I imagine Iran will continue to calibrate its attacks on the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, with a view to disrupt their economy but not kill people. Either way, we've already seen some of these countries, as the U.S. said today, starting to defend themselves, with the exception of the UAE, that don't have very powerful militaries. But what is indisputable is that these are U.S. allies, by and large, including Qatar. Even though Qatar, tries to have a foot in every camp, they host the biggest American base in the region, and right now that is coming home to roost. America has involved itself in a truly global historic operation against Iran, something quite spectacular that we haven't seen in decades. These are America's allies, and therefore right now, they are Iran's enemies. It's hard to contemplate that all these countries, including Saudi Arabia, are on the side of Israel that is fighting side by side with the U.S. in a war that has global impact and that the Israeli-American side initiated. I mean, this is unimaginable. It would have been unimaginable only a few years ago.
I think Mr. Pahlavi has for a long time thought that he could alone bring down this regime and lead the transition. I frankly am very skeptical of that. I think he's going to have to learn to share power. He's going to have to build a coalition that brings in different constituencies.
Certainly appreciate your insights and your time. Kaveh Sharuz, lawyer and senior fellow at the MacDonald Laurier Institute, live from Toronto. Thank you very much for being with us on this breaking news edition.
Thank you.
Dan Perry, your response.
Reza Pahlavi is a super interesting figure. He's the son of the former monarch, in effect, and you'd think he may have monarchic intent. I interviewed him just over a year ago for quite some time, and he struck me as an aspiring Democrat and not aspiring monarch, actually. He, I think, would like to lead a transition regime, and I suspect he would then run in the elections that followed, and I don't know if he would win those elections. Depends what else emerges in Iran. But he could play a positive role. My understanding is Trump is not necessarily enamored of Pahlavi. Maybe he feels he's too big for his britches.
He did say he's a nice guy.
He did say he's a nice guy.
Some people like him.
Yeah. No, it's some people like him, yes. I think Trump is maintaining all options open, and it is remarkable how we're in a point in history where, despite the fact that the American Constitution and American founders did not want an imperial presidency, everything comes down to Trump. There's a fork in the road right now. One direction is a pause in the war and an attempt to domesticate the potentially terrified new leaders, whoever they are. And then Trump would do a deal, and a lot of people would tell you that deal would involve sanctions relief, and it would give this terrible regime more life, but maybe they would behave better externally. Down the other path lies a genuine attempt to bring down a regime, and I suspect, I can't prove it, But I suspect that the spectacular success of the first 24 hours is giving Trump a temptation to try to do something historic. He's been bragging a lot in the past year and a half, and a lot of people think it looks ridiculous. Here would be a chance to achieve something that is not at all ridiculous. It would be truly historic, and if he succeeds in doing this, he might just, ironically, win, I don't know if the Nobel Prize, but many other prizes. It would be spectacular.
Certainly more things in Israel be named after him than already are. Look, I agree with your read of Trump, Dan. One of the reasons I think Trump may have been wishy-washy about explaining what the rationale and the goals of the war were is that he wanted to wait and see what kinds of opportunities would develop and what could be possible and what could be achieved based on what he saw on the ground and, let's be honest, from the air. Trump has obviously made a calculated decision that seems to have been well thought out beforehand, that he would rather throw the kitchen sink at the Iranians, even at the risk of hurting his coalition. This is going to hurt his coalition with Turkey, his coalition with the Iranian public, and maybe with other actors.
It might not, because the fact is, even countries that have claimed to be against this and that were skeptical about the use of American power, and even Western European countries that speak of legitimacy, are actually in favor.
That's correct. But this move is not a move many of those countries will support. And therefore, it endangers breaking up what has already been built, albeit been built in many cases because of the Iranians' high risk, high reward that they didn't get, decision to attack the Gulf states. But this could undermine some of that support. That seems to be the calculated risk that American and Israeli planners are taking in order to throw everything they have at the regime and worry about the internal contradictions of the strategy later.
Here's a possibility that may seem fantastical, but I'm prepared to put it on the table and we'll see what happens. Clearly, the Americans right now, given that they're paying a price, but a tolerable price for this war, are inclined to go as far as they can in degrading the military capability of the regime, not only to lash out at others, but also to oppress their own population. In time, 3, 4, 5 weeks, they could be so weakened that terms of surrender might be dictatable. And I would say...
That is what Pete Hegseth was essentially saying at his press conference.
The question is what those terms might be.
That is, of course, a best-case scenario from the Americans' perspective.
The question is what those terms might be. And we're generally accustomed to speaking of the nuclear file, the ballistic missile file, and and demanding an end to all support for the proxies. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if a fourth demand entered the table, which is a transition to a different kind of regime in Iran. For example, ending the clerical vetting of presidential candidates, re-empowering the parliament to actually run the country. And I couldn't tell you that the son of Khamenei is going to agree to this, but maybe the third or fourth Ayatollah in line just might.
We're talking about 60 million Kurds. They're spread in 4 regions: in western Iran, in northeast Iraq, in northeast Syria, and in southeast Turkey. The Kurds in Iraq are the only ones who have managed to establish their own autonomy, and you can see through their steps in recent months, and you can even say in recent years, that they are not going to take any step that is going to threaten that autonomy. You saw that with taking a very different voice from the Kurds in Syria, and now they are trying to distance themselves from these Iranian Kurds who have fled into Iraq, have trained and planned for this exact moment to cross back into Iran and to try and undermine the regime. And so if we are seeing American coordination or American consultation discussing with the Kurdish leadership, in my opinion, what the Kurds here would want to see, the Iranian Kurds, because we have to
make that distinction.
They may want to carve out a slice of Iran, or even see cross-border Kurdistan state. But the Iraqi Kurds, they are very fearful that such an adventure might fail, and they will have to pay with their hard-fought autonomy. And so that explains why we're hearing this response from the Iraqi Kurds.
Dan Perry.
The Iraqi Kurds are going to be very, very careful because, of course, indeed, they have at some cost carved out their own autonomy. And the issue now becomes Turkey. America, too, wants to see Turkey on side in this war. And more or less, they have that, despite Turkey's on and again, off again, somewhat closeness to the Ayatollah regime. But nothing would upset Turkey more than seeing the already offensive to them Iraqi Kurdistan trying to unite with an Iranian Kurdistan, because then they would absolutely envision a conspiracy where next is the adjacent Turkish Kurdistan, and that would make Turkey an enemy of this whole enterprise. So this has to be handled with the greatest conceivable delicacy.
I think that may explain the ballistic missile that Iran launched to Turkey today, trying to signal to them, you are stakeholders in this war as well. This might end up affecting you, and so you need to pressure Washington to stop this.
30 seconds, parting thoughts on the changing dynamics that this development could have on the region, briefly.
Well, it's what we're discussing here. This is becoming a regional war, not quite yet a world war, but if you take into account that, in fact, Iran is backed by Russia, China, and you know what, throw in North Korea, it's starting to look like an Axis versus the Allies, and it is quite remarkable that the Allies means the U.S., the West, the Arabs, and Israel.
We already have a war.
And the Kurds.
And the Kurds, who, by the way, would have the Americans being indebted to them.
Once
Dan
again.
Perry, Ariel Oseran, Owen Alterman.